Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I wanted to kind of let you know about something that I recently learned. And when I say recently, I only mean like a day or two ago I learned this. So there's this show called Dark Matter. It's actually something I've actually recorded for the podcast, like talking about the episodes of it, but I'll get to that in a little bit. But essentially, if you're unfamiliar with the show, it's this space action sci-fi drama that airs on the Sci-Fi channel here in the US. I'm sure it airs on other channels depending on what region you live in. Well, I was recently going to writing out like a nerd mode for it, and I ended up kind of looking up some information about the show that I didn't know, and I ended up finding out that the show itself is actually based off of a comic book, in particular a comic book series published by Dark Horse of the same name, Dark Matter, as well. And it does seem like, from the little bit I read of the synopsis, it does seem like the plot with the comic book does line up with the plot of the TV show. Like I said, I didn't read too much into it, just a little bit here and there, just to see if it was just kind of like a loose adaptation or like a true adaptation. From what I've read, that the plots are very similar. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, like I brought up earlier, the whole podcast angle, I reviewed, hate using the term review, but I reviewed it for Super-Fanta-Fi. That's where I talk about shows of the supernatural, fantasy, or science fiction genre, yada, 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 right? Well, obviously this show falls under that category, but at the time of me doing that, I didn't realize this show was actually based on a comic book. That does change things a bit. That's why I'm kind of bringing this up, because it kind of, it bothers me a little bit, because it's kind of like, yes, this show does fit under the criteria of Super-Fanta-Fi, but it is actually based on a comic book, so that's what makes me choose to put something under not too comic book. It's like, because you take certain things like Flash and Arrow, it's like, okay, even with my limited DC knowledge, I know that those are based on DC heroes, so it's like, I already know that they fit under not too comic book. You have other things like maybe like Preacher, Lucifer, and iZombie that I didn't really know about being comic books until I looked into them a little bit more. So those I kind of went ahead of time and knew. Let's use another example, like Wynonna Earp. Wynonna Earp, much like Dark Matter, both of them actually are very limited run series, because I don't know how long Wynonna Earp ran, but I know Dark Matter only ran for like 4 issues, I think. That show itself is actually based on a comic book as well. I think Image Comics, if I'm remembering that correctly. I could be completely wrong. But, because originally when I was doing Wynonna Earp, I was originally going to put it part of Super-Fanta-Fi because it falls under that category. But then at the beginning of it, I saw, oh, this is based on a graphic novel, the same name. I was like, huh, interesting. And then I looked it up, during an episode, I was like, oh, based on a graphic novel / comic book. So that's what made me go, okay, I'll just do it for not too comic book. But the thing is, I didn't know about Dark Matter, so that's why it went into that category. I mean, like I say, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to go back and change it, because I already kind of put it and Killjoys together, so that would mean I'd have to kind of remove the Dark Matter aspects of those and then just re-upload them as not too common. To me, that's too much of a hassle. It's not that big of a deal. They're already up there, so it's kind of why not leave them there? I'll just later on, when it comes time for the 3rd season, I'll just transition it over to not too comic book. It just irks me that I didn't know that ahead of time. So that's why I should probably do a little bit more research on certain things, because this has happened once before. It was with a very short-lived show called Second Chance. I believe the first 1 or 2 episodes I started with that when it came time for the podcast. I think I had it under crime centric, but then I transitioned it over to Super-Fanta-Fi, because I was like, because really this applies to every TV show that I'm doing, that basically they could fall under many different categories. Let's take iZombie, for example. Not too comic book aspect wise, because it is in fact based on a comic book. Super-Fanta-Fi, because of the whole zombie angle, the whole science fictional nature of the show, it could fall under that category as well. And then also crime centric, because it does have a crime drama aspect to it. But it's just certain things kind of take priority over others. Like for instance, if a show is based on a comic book, that kind of takes precedence over whatever genre it is. That's why Flash and Supergirl, they're science fictional shows, yet they still pertain to not to comic book, because they are based on comic books. Same reason why I did the same thing with Wynonna Earp and Preacher and whatnot. It's they could fall under other categories, but because it's them being based on comic books kind of takes precedence. So I don't know, it's like this weird, I guess you can think of it as a quirk, and it bothers me a little bit in the back of my mind. But like I said, it's nothing I can do about it. Like I said, I could change it, but it's at this point in time, it's not really worth going back to all that trouble. Just leave it as it is. Like I said, from now on, I am going to be a little more attentive and learn like, oh, that this is that kind of ahead of time. So I mean, really, that's all I really wanted to kind of point out and bring up in this video. I don't know if I'm gonna do more things like this. There are certain things I'm kind of like, I'm kind of running with the idea of like, oh, calling this like what I learned or whatever. And there might be more of these. Maybe this just be a one-off thing. We'll just kind of you have to kind of wait to see in the future, you know, see what I decide and what I come up with. So, but really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.